The political process in one U.S. state today fell completely apart. And while all states are equally important at some level, right now this is a particularly important state, and their democratic process today just went kersplat in an unexpected way. I mean, we have been following the story for a few days, actually, I guess for a couple of weeks now, as the story has been getting stranger and stranger. But today, truly, it went off the rails in a way that nobody saw coming. Okay, here's the stage for what happened. His name is Kris Kobach. He's the Secretary of State in Kansas. He is the top elections official in that state, but he's also a national figure. He's tried to make himself basically the national model, the national evangelist for how conservative Republicans should run elections. Por ejemplo, Kris Kobach has been marketing this program to states around the country. It's called the Interstate Cross-Check Program. The idea is to have as many states as possible dump all their voting records into this giant pool, and then everybody sorts through those records looking for any nefarious Americans who might be registered to vote in two places at once. Since Kris Kobach started coaxing other states into this project that he started, it's grown to include more than 20 states. 100 million voters are now voting under Kris Kobach's Interstate Cross-Check program, even though the program guide itself warns about a, quote, significant number of false positives. False positives where this Kris Kobach program makes it look like people are committing voter fraud when actually they're doing no such thing. Kris Kobach has also been a national evangelist for making voters hand over new kinds of documentation as a condition of being allowed to vote, documentation they never had to show before. He has evangelized voter ID laws for everyone, for states all across the country. In Kansas, though, where he is in charge, he's pushed the whole voter ID thing even further. He's ended up in court defending Kansas's new law, which didn't just make you have to prove your identity with an ID card, it made you have to prove your citizenship. How would you prove your citizenship? Do you know where your birth certificate is right now? Could you put your hands on it? That's the kind of thing that Kris Kobach wants to see, or as far as he can tell, you're not a citizen and you're not voting in Kansas. Kris Kobach made these new voting rules that were so strict in Kansas. They have to have a whole second parallel set of rules for voting in Kansas state elections and voting in federal elections. I mean, if you can't meet this new requirement being pushed by Kris Kobach in Kansas, then in all likelihood, you can still vote for president and for Congress because those are federal elections, but you can't vote in your local races. You can't vote for governor or mayor or secretary of state. Kris Kobach just doesn't trust you to vote under Kansas law, even if in the rest of the country you are recognized as a legal voter. So Kansas has created two separate classes of voting. We haven't seen much of this in this country since they used two-tiered voting systems in the Jim Crow South to keep African Americans from voting. I mean, we tried to get rid of a two-tiered voting system in this country generations ago, but Kansas has brought it back and is voting that way again in 2014, because if you ask Kris Kobach, some Kansas voters are really only half qualified to vote. 17% of the people who had otherwise lawfully registered to vote in Kansas since that law took effect last year were not allowed to vote this year. They went through the trouble of registering, but Kris Kobach said, you're not registered enough. Yeah, that might be good enough for you to vote in other elections, but not here. That is the system that was championed by Kris Kobach in Kansas.
So those 19,000 people haven't completed their registration yet, and they can complete it tomorrow and vote tomorrow if they want to. Nobody's been denied any rights, they just haven't finished it yet. Oh, and by the way, 72% of the people who have registered to vote since January 1st, 2013 have completed their application and have sent in proof of citizenship. So those are the 28% procrastinators. And I procrastinate sometimes too. I'd probably be one if I were registering to vote.
Listen, 72% of people trying to register to vote are getting there eventually, but the rest, procrastinators. 19,000 Kansans have registered to vote in a way that would work to vote in any other state and would work for them to vote in a federal election, but not in Kansas, not under Kris Kobach. Kris Kobach is a national conservative icon on this stuff. He is their crusader on this stuff, not just for Kansas, but for states around the country. He is the national poster boy for stopping any shenanigans in voting, even if nobody's quite sure what these supposed shenanigans actually are, and if the cost of stopping these shenanigans is actually stopping thousands of people from voting in Kansas who legally ought to be able to vote and who would be able to vote under any regime other than his. You got to stop the shenanigans. So that's who Kris Kobach is. That's the stage here. And today, Kris Kobach is reaping the whirlwind. What is happening with him right now and the election in his state, it's like the fact that it's happening to him, it's like when a family values politician like gets caught in bed with a goat or something, you know, like, oh, and it turns out it's a boy goat. Like, really? It happened to this guy? This guy? Yesterday, Secretary of State Kris Kobach lost a ruling in the state Supreme Court in Kansas. Kris Kobach had been trying to force a Democrat to remain on the ballot for the U.S. Senate race in Kansas this year. The Democratic candidate had tried to quit the race, but Mr. Kobach was refusing to let him quit the race. And the race we're talking about here, of course, is the Senate seat, the race for the Senate seat now held by Republican incumbent Senator Pat Roberts. This race has arguably become the most important Senate race in the country as the Republican Party tries to take over the Senate, and they do not want to have to defend what ought to be safe seats in deep red places like Kansas. But Senator Roberts is in real trouble, especially if the Democrat in the race drops out as he wants to, because that leaves the unpopular Pat Roberts trailing a popular and well-funded independent candidate. And in a two-way race between these two guys, I mean, everybody in Kansas understands the dynamic here. Pat Roberts has a much harder time keeping his seat in the Senate if the Democrat drops out, so that vote is no longer split three ways. Head-to-head, the independent guy looks like he beats him and beats him handily. And national Republicans would have a much harder time winning the 6 seats they are desperate to win in order to flip control of the U.S. Senate from blue to red if that happens. I mean, all states are important. But this Kansas race is important like that. I mean, it's the whole country, right? So Kris Kobach, this is his moment. And as the chief elections official in Kansas, he has tried to force the Democrat to stay in the race. Yesterday, the Kansas Supreme Court ordered him that he needed to take the Democrat's name off the ballot. The court ruled unanimously. All the Democratic-appointed judges and the Republican-appointed judges, it was unanimous. Kris Kobach, take the guy's name off the ballot. So Kris Kobach lost that court fight yesterday. And after he lost the fight, he went back to trying to make this a three-way race anyway. He announced that he'd given the Democrats 8 days to pick a new candidate to put on the ballot. Kris Kobach also said he was pushing back the deadline in order to allow time for that to happen. He was pushing back the deadline that had been put on him because there's a certain date by which we have to send out overseas military ballots. He said he was going to push that deadline back to September 27th. Now, it's important to know here that the Democratic Party says Kris Kobach can't order them to do anything. Right? They don't want to put anybody on the ballot. They like the independent guy running against Pat Roberts. That's why their candidate dropped out. The Democrats are not going to rush to fill that ballot line on Kris Kobach's say-so. But it's also important to note what Kris Kobach told the court before they ruled against him. He told them officially that as Secretary of State, he was up against a hard deadline of tomorrow, Saturday, September 20th, to get those ballots out to the National Guardsmen and women and other Kansas troops serving overseas. He told them already that's the deadline. That's a hard deadline. And there's a reason he said that, because that is actually federal law with a deadline of tomorrow to get those ballots sent out. Well, the Associated Press reported yesterday in Kansas that the Justice Department had agreed to give Mr. Kobach a 1-week extension on that deadline. I don't know why the AP reported that. Today, the Justice Department said, we don't know what you're talking about. There's no waiver for Kansas. Kris Kobach hasn't gotten any waiver for us. There's no extension here. That's the law. We haven't been asked to extend it. We're not extending it. This is news to us. So now the Kansas Secretary of State has changed his mind again. Late today, Kris Kobach said, okay, fine. I will send those ballots out tomorrow. I will meet that deadline because, you know, it is the law. But Kris Kobach is still trying to pull more rabbits out of his hat. He's not going to send just the ballots that show Pat Roberts running against the independent guy and no Democrat. He's not going to just send that out because that makes him too uncomfortable. And so instead, he's invented a new way of electioneering this particular Senate race. He's going to send the ballots, but he's also going to send a disclaimer with them. Like an asterisk, a disclaimer on a federal ballot. Kansas, I could not love you more. Seriously, are you trying to get away with this? I thought I couldn't love him more, but then we actually got a copy today of the disclaimer. We got the letter/disclaimer that Mr. No Shenanigans Secretary of State Kris Kobach is about to send out with the ballot in this race, and it is fantastic. Ready? Quote, two Kansas voters receiving ballots pursuant to the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, UOCAVA. Accompanying this letter is your UOCAVA ballot for the general election to be held on November 4th, 2014. As you may be aware, cases pending before the Kansas Supreme Court concerning the Democratic nomination for the office of United States Senator. It is possible that as a result of that litigation, the court may order that a replacement ballot be sent to you which contains the name of the Democratic nominee for the office of United States Senator. Regardless of what the court decides, we'll be sending you a subsequent letter once the case is decided to further inform you about this ballot. You may vote using the ballot accompanying this letter as soon as you receive it, or you may wait to vote until you've received further notification from us. To ensure that your vote is counted, though, your ballot must be received by November 4th, 2014, unless a later deadline is communicated in our subsequent correspondence to you. If a replacement ballot is sent to you and you have already returned the ballot that accompanies this letter, only your replacement ballot will be counted. Love, Kris. So, literally, what I just read to you, without any, no ellipses, that's what they're sending. That's the clear instructions they're sending. That's what they want the ballot to be. That's what they want one of the ballots to be. Of the couple of different kinds of ballots they're going to have people voting on to vote for Senate in Kansas. And the two different kinds of ballots might have different lists of candidates on them. And you're supposed to interpret that when you get that. You're like serving in Germany, you're in the National Guard, and you get this with your ballot. And like, what are you exactly you're supposed to do? I mean, if you vote with the ballot that Kris Kobach sends you, puts in the mail to you tomorrow, with this disclaimer sent along with it, right? If you vote that ballot, and then Kris Kobach sends you a second ballot, which of your ballots is he going to throw out? Is he going to throw out the first ballot that you sent because he mailed you another one? What if you didn't actually use the other one that he sent to you? I mean, what if you like the way you're going to vote when you see the one list of candidates, but then when he sends you a different ballot with a different list of candidates on it later, you maybe want to change your vote because you like that different list of candidates better? Which ballot are they going to count? And how are they going to know which one to count? And how are you going to know which one they did count or if they counted it? Do you send back the disclaimer? Do you need to initial every line? No shenanigans. We also learned today that Kris Kobach says he is negotiating with the Justice Department to now try to move the date of the entire election. The election. You know, the election day this year, November 4th, check your calendar. It's pre-printed in there. It's kind of a federally set thing. Not for Kansas. Kris Kobach wants the election in Kansas to instead be November 12th. No shenanigans. Kris Kobach was already amazing to watch when he was just trying to force the Democrat to stay on the ballot. Then he ordered the Democratic Party that they must choose a new candidate, and then they said they would not, and then he changed the date for sending out the military ballots despite the law, and then he changed the date back again, and now he wants to send one ballot now with a disclaimer, and then he wants to send a replacement ballot that he says is the only one he will count, and not the one he's sending now with the disclaimer. And all of this from the man who's been lecturing America on how to run your elections right. Bring your IDs. Prove your citizenship. You want to vote? Jump through flaming hoops with chihuahuas. This is Kansas. I'm Mr. No Shenanigans. Cut the shenanigans, even if that costs 18,000 registered voters from voting. They're procrastinators, and I'm Kris Kobach. Oh, and maybe this year we'll delay the election a week? Just for Kansas? The story has been getting more fascinating with every passing day, but today it went completely nuts. We'll be right back.